This is heavily influenced by an essay on my site I edited from a paper my father did, excellent paper, uh, uh, called Democracy, a Social Power Analysis. Uh, and the sense that, wherever concentrated power is, I mean, ideally, you want to get things decentralized if you can, but wherever concentrated power is, you want to counter its tendency to attract corrupting influences. Uh, and so, yeah, the more power somebody has, the more they can accumulate more power. So, for example, if you make it transparent so that everything that's going on is seen by the larger public or those over whom the power is exercised, that creates a feedback loop. They can see what's going on and respond to it in ways that constrain the misuse of that power and channel it towards the common good of those over whom it's being exercised. And open to critique, can also be open to appreciation, but that's very often it's open to appreciation, but not critique. So you need to have it open to people saying negative things about it. Negative things don't necessarily add to collective wisdom, but being able to say negative things is really important, to have an open ability to respond, which is where a lot of the system dynamics, the valuable system dynamics of the Constitution, the human rights dimension, civil rights, is connected to the ability to have that feedback between the people who are exercising power and the people over whom it's exercised, and having it constitutionally overseen by and answerable to those whom it affects, where some people say it, those affected by the decision should have a voice in the decision. And constitutionally, it's like, okay, this is the way things are set up. It's not just that people can and do check out what's going on in the concentrated government power, but it's constitutionally set up. It's part of how things are set up. And note that a lot of this is usually applied to the concentrated power of government, but corporations and extremely wealthy people and unions that are well organized, all these things are concentrated forms of power, which are discussed in my father's paper, which I highly recommend everybody read because it's really, really enlightening. And that's, they should be, all these things should apply to them. It's like having these, what are they called? The bodies that the people can contribute to and not be seen who is contributing to political campaigns, the super PACs in the United States. That's an example of not being transparent. Anyway, so constitutionally overseen and limited in scope and term. Like, if you have power, what is it being applied to? You have to say, you can apply this power here and here and here, but you can't apply it here and here and here. There's specific constraints on where you can exercise power, as opposed to the dictator who can apply his power anywhere. And the term, how long are you going to be holding on to this power? And that's usually the terms of, people in legislatures, the people, president or prime minister, whatever. It's usually some kind of term to their power. Or there's people who say term limits. You can only have 2 terms. If your term is 2 years or 4 years, you can only serve 2 terms. Whatever it is, there needs to be a point where it is terminated and the power goes on to somebody else, so that the tendency to concentrate power is limited. And one of the things we call the revolving door in the government in the United States. I'm sure it's other places too, where you can only serve so many terms in the government, but then if you've done the things that a corporation wants you to do, then you get a position as president or, be on the board of that corporation, and a very high paying, or you can go around and do high paying jobs, whatever, and various laws to constrain your ability to retain or use your power elsewhere, or have it, corrupt it while you're in your office and not, and then be able to cash in on your corruption afterwards. Those are all parts of the feedback loops, being able to control and constrain those, balancing it with other power centers. You have corporations being balanced by unions, and you have the legislative branch and the administrative branch and the judicial branch balancing each other out. Those are all forms of power, and having grassroots movements rise up to counter various forms of concentrated power, and being able to have those movements rise up creates other power centers. Now, this is all looking at power over. In another one of the patterns, we'll discuss other forms of power, but where you have concentrated controlling, management, influence power, these things should be in place. Media power is another kind of power, and there's very concentrated media power that is not adequately transparent, it's not overseen adequately, etc. So if this principle is applied universally, not only to government power, but to all forms of concentrated power, it tends to create a more balanced scene where all the perspectives can get their word in edgewise and not be squeezed out of the public dialogue out of which the wisdom gets woven. And one of the constraints on power, also we'll be discussing elsewhere in another pattern, is random selection. It's another way to intervene in the ability of power centers to, persist in their power and control all the other things around them that they need to control in order to remain in power. So this is there's lots of stuff going on here, but all of that has to do with constraining concentrated power. And, the methods, this is not methods in the sense of a dialogic method or something. I've named a bunch of them: having a constitution, having movements, having unions, voting is a constraint on concentrated power. If you can actually use your vote to get rid of the people who are in concentrated power or change the structure of power. Law is both a source of concentrated power and a check on concentrated power, depending on how it's used. So those are all methods.